This is Obama's America. Welcome to the USS of R, now called the USS of A, where they can take a U.S. Marine who publishes anti-government diatribes on his own Facebook page and is arrested and thrown into a mental hospital by Barack Hussein Obama. Released yesterday as a result of the work of the conservative civil rights group, the Rutherford Institute. This is what it's come down to, and most of you are so dumb, you have no idea that we're sinking into the USS of R. You ask any Russian who lived in the Soviet Union, and you will find that President Obama is exactly what occurred in the ex-Soviet Union in the early days of Stalinism. This is what they had. You have no idea what you're living through, that you're losing your very freedoms themselves. But I don't want to agitate you, alarm you, or scare you in any way, because God only knows you don't want to hear it. It's summertime and the living is easy. So let's have some Ponchielli music. Let's let people dance like the puppets that they are on the edge of the string. See, here's how the Soviet Union worked. People lived behind an iron curtain, and everything that they knew came to them from the government. All information that they received was from the government. And so the Soviets had no idea what kind of life people were leading outside of the Soviet Union. They didn't even know that there were tomatoes in stores. They were living with very little, but they were told they were living with a lot. All the platitudes of the then Soviet government told them that everything they had was wonderful as a result of socialism. And the Soviet citizens, not knowing what was going on outside of them, because of the liberal, progressive, communist regime that was running the Soviet Union, had no idea what reality actually was. In fact, in the 1930s, when communists were starving to death as a result of the Russian people being decimated by regulations that were placed upon farmers, New York Times correspondent Walter Duranty reported the following. Here's what he said in the New York Times. Any report of a famine in Russia is today an exaggeration or malignant propaganda. For his lies, Duranty won a Pulitzer Prize. Did you hear this? Through the late 1950s, your liberal newspapers in America ignored and buried stories about work prison camps in the Soviet Union. But more than 20 million people accused of opposing centralized government were worked to death or executed in the Soviet Union. Now, we are seeing the beginning of this. We're seeing the infancy of it in the United States of America. If the U.S. government can snatch a Marine off the streets simply for having posted anti-government feelings on his own Facebook page, then we are living in the ex-Soviet Union. And think, because after all, a nice man like Romney isn't saying it, and after all, he's a conservative, isn't he? No, he's not a conservative, isn't he? He's a member of the establishment. He's a member of the ruling class. He always has been. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. And, of course, his style of ruling, I will take over the communist style of ruling any day of the week. But the fact of the matter is, he by no means is a conservative telling us what we are facing under this tyrannical regime called the Obama administration. Now, I could ask you to call me, and I could ask to talk about it, but I think it's quite futile. And so what I'd like to do is just chat today, this Friday, and tell you about this and tell you about that. Maybe I'll read from Trickle-Down Tyranny. Maybe I'll read from my forthcoming book, Train Tracks. Maybe I'll read from the opening chapter of the great novel, the second novel that I'm publishing next spring, called A Time for War, which opens with the crash of a helicopter in Afghanistan where 21 of America's finest die in a flaming wreck. Sort of based upon reality. It's sort of art imitating life. But of course, since we have no government investigation of who put all of those Navy SEALs on that helicopter, we must turn to fiction for some answers, don't we? Today I went to an Indian buffet. You know, I eat in buffets because I don't like talking to waiters. I don't like asking for anything. I like to go in and eat and be left alone in the back of the restaurant. I do this quite often. And I saw America in a microcosm in this buffet. Here you have immigrants from India working virtually 20 hours a day, trying to run a little restaurant inside a hotel or a motel, which they don't even own. They rent the space from other folks from India who own the hotel. And I suppose they eke out a living. And they have a buffet, all you can eat for $8.95. And they were making a decent living. And lo and behold, then another immigrant group discovered that you can eat all that you want for $8.95. And the Mexican gardeners have arrived. Their trucks are parked outside. And now the Indians are about to go out of business because the Mexican gardeners figure if it says all you can eat for $8.95 and they're poor and they're hungry and they're big strapping men, it says all you can eat for $8.95. They eat all they can for $8.95. They eat and they eat and they eat and they eat, and they're driving the other immigrant group bankrupt. So what's the point of the story? The point of the story is that Indian restaurant is like America itself. We are like a giant buffet that says to the immigrants from these third world countries, come here and eat as much as you want for virtually no payment, and we won't stop you. And anyone who tells you to stop eating is a racist or a thisist or a thatist. And so we don't care if you eat us out of house and home because we don't want to be seen as mean people. We're nice Americans. So we have $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $3 trillion debt. Immigrants are eating us alive through education, medication, not putting anything into the system. Every extra dollar they get, they send to their home country. Eat at the buffet called America. Just keep piling the bones up on the plate. And if anyone dares say a word, why call the politically correct police and have them arrested for insulting the poor immigrant. You see, sometimes art imitates life, and sometimes life imitates art. And on that note, we'll go back to a great a great Italian composer, Amilcare Ponchielli. Let's listen to the finale of his Dance of the Hours. Let's hear it again. Begin today's program on the Savage Nation before the boring convention on Monday, which I care nothing about, incidentally. As I said to you yesterday, with the discovery of electricity, there should have been no longer any political conventions. I mean, what is the necessity of a convention? Originally, conventions were held so the colonists could go by horseback and elect their candidate for various and sundry positions, such as the president. But there's no reason for that. And with the invention, as I say, of the telephone, then, of course, hey, way after the telephone, we even had a teletype. Then after the teletype, somebody invented the Internet. What is the point of these conventions? Think of the millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars wasted on nothing but a charade. It's a charade because we know it's Obama versus Romney. Let's get on with the election. It should have occurred a year ago. And so I begin now with Trickle-Down Tyranny. The #1 New York Times bestselling author Michael Savage wrote it. And I'm going to read to you from my book because I still think it's the most important book to be read before the election. I'd advise you to either give your copy or buy another copy for your undecided, idiotic relatives. Here it goes. Advice to the next president, a savage worldview. Economies can be rebuilt. Armies can be repopulated. But once a nation's pride is gone, it can almost never be restored. The loss of a nation's honor is something not even centuries can repair. The next president must love America. The next president must embody unequivocally everything that is good about this country going back to its founding. The next president must be the exact opposite of Barack Obama. He must be a man of high character and strong commitment to American values because he will be facing problems and issues that no U.S. leader has had to face since the years leading up to World War II. In the late 1930s, only a few years before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, our economy was still trying to recover from the Great Depression. In the face of the policies of a big government president, our military had been depleted, and our enemies were gathering strength and threatening war on many fronts. While this was going on, our president and European leaders were hiding their heads in the sand, downplaying the threat from those enemies in much the same way Barack Obama is doing today. The Obama administration is concealing the seriousness of many problems that affect every one of us in our everyday lives. Let me explain what I mean by giving you information you won't hear from any other source. I'm Michael Savage. I'll be right back. Savage.